The point I was going to make is, Jessica Yellen, you have the New York tabloids doing front page stories on Obama's official portrait and Obama's new limousine. And Parade magazine does a cover story on Obama's letter to his daughters. It just seemed, we were talking earlier about, he's not just the president-elect, he's a worldwide celebrity, and he's been covered that way.
He sells. I mean, in this economy, the media is going with what gets ratings and what sells magazines and newspapers. You see all these commemorative editions. It's because he's moving product. And so that'll probably last until his poll ratings take a dip.
Just Obama tchotchkes could rescue the economy alone.
I have seen a few of them on sale here in town.
Do you really have an Obama thong?
I have an Obama thong.
John McCain, though, and his celebrity ad. I mean, think about this. Look at what we're doing every day now. This is what John McCain was talking about.
Well, John McCain can't complain because Obama's throwing a dinner on McCain's in McCain's honor on tomorrow night, just before the actual inauguration.
I'm going. I'll report back to you.
All right. Bipartisan Stephanie Miller. All right. President Bush, as I mentioned earlier, held his last news conference this past week, and he had some unusually positive things to say about the press. Let's roll it.
I have respected you. Sometimes I didn't like the stories that you wrote or reported on. Sometimes you misunderestimated me. Oh, the burdens, you know. Why did the financial collapse have to happen on my watch? It's just pathetic, isn't it? Self-pity.
Steve Hayes, this was an unusual performance by George Bush, and obviously he's been trying to go out on a high note, a gracious note, and yet the media have not exactly been giving him a warm send-off.
No, they haven't. I mean, I think it's understandable what he says. You don't want to, beat up or take shots at the people who are essentially writing this first draft of history, as we often talk about. So it makes sense that he would go out without taking shots at him. I think we might hear a little bit different story when he finally sits down and writes his memoirs and is a little bit more critical about individual stories or coverage of, the early parts of the Iraq War, things like that.
But, Stephanie, aren't some of you, your friends in the so-called liberal media, kind of kicking him on the way out the door? I mean, he's gone Tuesday, and yet it does seem like everybody's kind of rehashing all the mistakes that he made, which is appropriate, but I wonder if there's too much of it.
It is the end of an error, as they say. I can't hear that misunderestimate joke enough. Can you? Oh, I got to wipe my eyes. I think it is honestly hard to misunderestimate what a disaster this presidency has been. So I think, a lot of the criticism is, when you hear this spin, it really makes you dizzy. You're like, are you kidding me?
What bothers you is the fact that
left the economy, and
what bothers you is the fact that he is someone selectively trying to put the best face, as any outgoing president would, on his record as he heads back to Texas.
Yes, the Bush Legacy Project, a huge success. It's hard to spin this, it really is.
I wonder, Jessica Yellen, whether George W. Bush will always be a polarizing figure in the media climate. For example, when he had his farewell speech, that 13-minute address on Thursday night, I was flipping around and I see Bill O'Reilly saying, he came off as very sincere, and if there was an approval rating for him as a person as opposed to as a president, it'd be 60%. And then I see Chris Matthews saying, he's like a rich kid driving his father's car, and because of him, 100,000 Iraqis are dead. And I just had the sense that this is going to go on forever.
Well, I guess we'll have to see. I think part of that may have to do with his electoral strategy. I mean, he really did divide into red and blue intentionally to win, and that sort of is borne out through the 8 years. At the same time, even Bill Clinton wasn't the most popular guy as he was leaving after Mark Rich and some of the sort of hangover everybody was feeling at that point. So after 8 years, everybody's had enough, and we'll see what happens as history is written.
Some of these events that Barack Obama has been doing, a meeting with Bush and the 3 ex-presidents, as I mentioned, inviting McCain for dinner, meeting with George Will and Bill Kristol and David Brooks, is this buying him a lot of coverage as being, as he often talked about, somehow post-partisan, or is it really just symbolism, and we in the media like symbolism?
Well, it's probably a little bit of both. I think it's gotten him a lot of coverage. We're talking about it. People have been talking about it for the whole week. It was interesting. I interviewed Mitch McConnell this week, and I asked him, because he's doing the same thing with politicians on Capitol Hill, and I asked him about this. And he said, look, we appreciate the attention. I've enjoyed talking to Barack Obama. We sincerely want to work with him, but charm only goes so far. At the end of the day, if he wants Republican support for things, he's going to have to adopt Republican policies.
Stephanie, I've got half a minute. I mean, George Bush talked about changing the tone when he came to office. Obama really seems determined to reach out to Republicans and conservatives. Of course, we'll see what happens when he takes office. But I have the sense that, we still live in a very partisan political media culture.
Well, but Howard, as you said earlier, the steps he's even taken so far, he's been more of a uniter than George Bush has been in 8 years. He's done more of the compassionate conservatism or whatever, all those catchphrases we heard of and never saw any evidence of than George Bush did in 8 years. So I'm hopeful.
Well, we'll see. I have to remind everybody that he hasn't taken office yet. That's coming very soon. Stephen Hayes, Stephanie Miller, Jessica Yellen, thanks very much for joining us. Up next on Reliable Sources, black and white at the White House with the nation's first African-American president ready to take office. He'll be greeted by a press corps containing few members of color. 2 African-American correspondents join our discussion. That's next.